Okay, let's unpack this. Today we're embarking on a really remarkable deep dive. It's a truly powerful and inspiring story of resistance, of courage, and this unwavering fight for dignity.
Hmm.
We're going to explore a pivotal moment, one that's often kind of overlooked, I think, in the history of tribal communities in India. It's a story that really sent tremors through an entire empire.
It certainly did.
And it continues to resonate deeply today, doesn't it? It's just such a testament to the human spirit.
Absolutely. It's a crucial piece of history.
You've shared some truly fascinating material with us, detailing the Santal Rebellion of 1855. It's often called the Santal Hole, right?
That's right. Hull, meaning rebellion or uprising in Santali.
Led by these two brothers, Sidu and Kanu. So our mission today is, well, to go beyond just the surface facts. We want to extract the most important sort of nuggets of knowledge, maybe some surprising insights from these sources we've got, helping you, the listener, understand not just what happened, but really why this uprising was so profoundly significant. So yeah, get ready for a journey into a critical piece of global history.
And what's truly striking here, I think, is how this specific narrative, the Santal Hole, this really fierce indigenous uprising, it actually exemplifies a broader pattern,
Ah, okay.
a recurring pattern of colonial exploitation and the kind of valiant, often desperate responses it provoked all around the world. We'll be looking closely at the deeply oppressive conditions that really culminated in such a fierce uprising,
Right.
and critically, its far-reaching implications, its lasting legacy, even though it was ultimately defeated in a military sense.
Yeah.
And it raises this really important sort of timeless question for us, doesn't it? What
Hmm.
precisely compels ordinary people, often with minimal resources, minimal weapons, to take up arms against this overwhelming technologically superior power?
Especially when, as we'll see, all the other avenues for justice had been just systematically closed off.
Exactly, when there's nowhere else to turn.
Okay, so to really grasp the gravity and, frankly, the immense courage behind the Santal Rebellion, we absolutely need to set the scene.
Context is everything here.
Our sources, they paint this vivid, almost idyllic picture, really, of the Santal tribe's existence before the storm hit, before the pervasive and often destructive influence of the British East India Company began to fundamentally reshape their world.
Yeah, and if we connect this to the bigger picture, establishing that pre-colonial reality, it really helps us appreciate the scale of what was about to be lost
Right.
and precisely what the Santals were fighting so fiercely to reclaim. Their traditional homeland, it was defined by these lush green forests, the rolling hills of what is now present-day Jharkhand, but also extending into parts of Bihar and West Bengal.
So a pretty large area there.
Significant area, yeah. And this wasn't just, a geographical location for them. It was the very cradle of their identity, the source of their sustenance, the living repository of their ancient culture, their spiritual beliefs.
It sounds like their whole way of life was deeply intertwined with that land.
Absolutely. Deeply rooted in harmony with nature. A sustainable existence where the land provided, pretty generously for their needs through practices like shifting cultivation, and the forests offered abundant resources. They were a fiercely proud people with a robust communal social structure. Land was often held collectively, you see.
Not like individual private property.
Exactly. Not something to be bought and sold in the way the British understood it. It was more like a sacred trust. Passed down through generations. They cherished their land, their traditions, their self-governance through their own village councils and headmen, the manjis and parganates.
Right.
And above all, their fundamental freedom. It was an existence characterized by this profound sense of dignity, self-sufficiency, a really stark contrast to the individualistic, extractive mindset of the incoming colonial system.
And it was precisely this deeply entrenched, self-sufficient way of life that began to just fundamentally change for the worse, didn't it? By the mid-19th century. That set the stage for just unimaginable suffering.
It did. The pressure started mounting.
So what exactly were these insidious forces, these things that started to systematically dismantle their lives and push them right to the absolute brink? What was this injustice that became the critical catalyst? It sounds like it wasn't just one thing.
No, definitely not one single issue. It was a complex, suffocating confluence of pressures. And the sources are remarkably clear on the deeply systematic nature of this oppression.
Systematic, okay.
Yeah, it wasn't merely, isolated incidents of hardship or just a few bad apples. It was pervasive, an institutionalized problem. A system basically designed to extract resources, land, and labor from the Santals, regardless of the devastating human cost.
And the land was central to that, wasn't it?
The very first, and maybe the most fundamental, seed of discontent was that systematic seizure and alienation of their ancestral lands. For the Santals, like so many indigenous communities globally, land is just. It's so much more than a commodity.
Right, it's identity.
Exactly. It's intrinsically tied to their spiritual beliefs, their cultural practices, their lineage, the memory of their ancestors. So to lose that land wasn't just an economic blow, it was a profound spiritual and cultural dislodgement. It was severing their connection to their heritage, their very being.
How did that happen? How was the land actually taken?
Well, this dispossession wasn't random. It was a direct consequence of British land revenue policies, particularly the permanent settlement of 1793.
Ah, yes. We've discussed that before in other contexts.
Right, and while designed for Bengal, Bihar, and Orissa, it had these ripple effects. It essentially privatized land, turning those traditional communal holdings into transferable private property.
Which created landlords.
Exactly. It created a new class of landlords, the zamindars, who were often outsiders. And the Santals, lacking formal written titles, not understanding these new property laws, they became incredibly vulnerable. Their traditional rights just weren't recognized in this new colonial legal framework.
Making their lands easy targets.
Easy targets for takeover by these opportunistic zamindars and other non-tribal settlers. People they start calling dikas. We should probably talk about that term.
Yeah, dikuses. What did that signify exactly?
Dikas essentially meant outsiders, foreigners, but it quickly took on a very negative connotation. It came to mean the exploiters, the moneylenders, the landlords, the merchants, even the lower-level British officials and police who were part of this oppressive system. Anyone who wasn't Santal and was seen as profiting from their misery.
So it was a term loaded with resentment and bitterness.
Absolutely. It signified the other, the source of their problems.
Okay, so land seizure was one major factor. But it wasn't just the land being taken, was it? Our sources really highlight another particularly insidious and cruel form of exploitation, these infamous debt traps.
Oh, yes. The debt traps.
This sounds like a cycle just meticulously designed to ensnare them, bind them forever, making escape virtually impossible.
It really was. The debt traps were a particularly devastating mechanism. You had these moneylenders, often called Mahajans, typically non-tribal outsiders who'd moved into Santal areas offering loans.
Loans for basic things, I imagine.
Often, yeah. For basic necessities like food during lean seasons or maybe grain for sowing or, critically, to pay the new cash taxes demanded by the zamindars.
So the taxes created a need for cash they didn't necessarily have.
Precisely, which drove them to the honeylenders. And these loans came with truly exorbitant interest rates, just astronomical.
How high are we talking?
We're talking rates that could easily range from 50% to, well, sometimes an astonishing 500% annually.
500%, that's
Yeah.
unbelievable.
It's utterly crippling. And the Santals, remember, they're unfamiliar with written contracts, receipts, the whole complex colonial financial and legal system. They often agreed to terms they just didn't fully comprehend. They operated on verbal agreements, on trust.
Which was just mercilessly exploited.
Mercilessly. So when they inevitably couldn't repay the initial loan, maybe a bad harvest, maybe unfair market prices, or just the sheer weight of that insane interest, the debt would compound rapidly.
And spiral out of control.
Completely, leading to this truly dehumanizing condition, bonded labor, or kamiyadi as it was known locally. The sources describe them being forced to work like bonded laborers under harsh conditions.
And this wasn't just hard work, was it? It was more like...
It was effectively slavery. Generational slavery in many cases. Individuals, sometimes whole families, perpetually indebted, forced to work for the Mahajans or zamindars for years, maybe decades.
Their labor just paying off interest, never touching the principal?
Often, yes. Or the debt somehow just kept growing through manipulation of accounts. They had no freedom of movement, no control over their lives. Their fundamental dignity just systematically stripped away. It was a vicious, inescapable cycle.
So land seizure, crippling debt traps. But then there's also the direct oppression from the authorities, the people empowered by this new colonial system. It sounds like an all-encompassing vice.
Indeed. The direct oppression came from multiple angles, reinforcing each other, really solidifying the Santals' entrapment. It wasn't just the individual moneylenders acting alone.
Right.
You had British officials representing the colonial power itself and the local zamindars, these landlords, revenue collectors, newly empowered by the British system, wielding immense, often unchecked, authority.
And these zamindars, they weren't necessarily Santal themselves.
Often not. Frequently outsiders, or maybe local elites, who had shrewdly aligned themselves with the British, and they ruthlessly exploited their new authority to squeeze the Santals even further, imposing arbitrary taxes, illegal taxes sometimes, demanding forced labor for projects that offered no benefit to the Santals themselves.
Like building roads or something.
Exactly, stuff like that. And using their power to silence any form of dissent, often with the backing of the colonial police and courts.
So the system itself supported this exploitation.
That's the crucial point. The sources explicitly highlight the institutional nature of the problem. They state the British East India Company, through its colonial system, allowed moneylenders and landlords to exploit the tribal people.
Allowed them, almost sanctioned it.
It's not about just a few bad actors. It's about the very framework of colonial governance that facilitated and sanctioned this systematic exploitation. It created an environment where the Santals were just rendered legally vulnerable, economically destitute, systematically disempowered.
With no real way to fight back or get justice.
No real avenue for recourse, no. The absence of impartial justice from the colonial courts or police just made their suffering worse. They felt truly abandoned, oppressed by every single layer of this new power structure.
Okay, so it becomes glaringly clear, doesn't it? This wasn't just a series of random misfortunes or bad luck. It was a deeply ingrained, almost perfectly engineered system, a well-oiled machine designed for exploitation.
That's a good way to put it, a machine.
Tell us more about how this deceitful legal system, as the sources call it, specifically worked to strip the Santals of their basic fundamental rights. It really sounds like their unfamiliarity with these new alien ways wasn't just a disadvantage, it was actively weaponized against them.
Absolutely weaponized. This is precisely where that profound cultural gap, that lack of understanding between the Santals and the colonial administration or the Didicus was exploited, turned their traditional trust and, frankly, their innocence into an agonizing vulnerability.
How so? What were their traditional systems like?
Well, the Santals operated under their own time-honored traditional laws and customs. These were typically oral, communal, based on mutual trust, community consensus, a deep understanding of the local context. Things were sorted out in village councils, the panchayats, led by their manjis.
Right. Based on tradition, not written code.
Exactly. They had virtually no experience with the complex, formal, written, and often deliberately opaque colonial legal systems that were suddenly imposed upon them. This unfamiliarity became the critical point of exploitation.
So the term deceitful legal systems isn't an exaggeration then?
Not at all. The sources use it accurately because these systems were structured in a way the Santals simply couldn't navigate, let alone understand. Imagine being confronted with these intricate, multi-page written contracts.
Often in a language they didn't even speak or read.
Sometimes, yes. Or just filled with legal jargon they couldn't decipher. For a largely non-literate society that relied on verbal agreements, these documents were completely alien, abstract, utterly unintelligible. They couldn't read the fine print, couldn't grasp the long-term implications of signing, often just with a thumbprint away rights they didn't even realize they possessed in the eyes of the British or the Dicus.
The power imbalance must have been just astronomical.
Completely. It was total.
So they were effectively tricked, weren't they, often repeatedly, into giving away their ancestral land, their labor, without truly realizing the permanence, the devastating consequences of what they were agreeing to under this new law.
Precisely. They were compelled, coerced, tricked into giving away their land. Through fraudulent contracts, outright deception, or just under severe economic duress. They had no choice. And what might have seemed like, a temporary agreement in their mind, maybe a loan secured against land for a season, became, under colonial law, a permanent, irrevocable loss of their ancestral land.
And that legal vulnerability led directly to the bonded labor situation we talked about.
Directly. As the source states, they were forced to work like bonded laborers under harsh conditions. And let's be clear again, this wasn't just difficult work, it was effective, legalized slavery.
Right.
Santal individuals, whole families sometimes, became perpetually indebted, trapped in this cycle of unpaid labor, forced to work without wages, sometimes for generations, under constant threat of violence or more debt being piled on.
Their children inheriting the debt.
Exactly. Inheriting the bondage, their freedom of movement curtailed. They had no control over their own lives, over the products of their own labor. Their labor was just continuously exploited for the immense profit of the Mahajans and Zamindars.
who were protected by the very legal system that enabled all this misery.
Precisely. The system protected the exploiters, not the exploited. It was an institutionalized stripping away of basic human rights and dignity.
And just to compound this absolute misery, it sounds like there was no legitimate way for them to seek justice, no way to appeal, no way to get redress within this new alien system. Their cries for help just fell on deaf ear, or worse.
That's the absolutely crucial suffocating point. The thing that really drove them to desperation. They had no legal rights within this new imposed colonial framework. The very system that was so effectively exploiting them also systematically denied them any means of redress, any basic appeal.
So if a Santal tried to complain,
If a Santal tried to bring a genuine grievance, say, against a powerful Mahajan cheating them, or an influential Zamindar taking their land unfairly to a British court, their claims were almost invariably dismissed, ignored, or somehow twisted against them.
why? Why were the courts so biased?
Well, they lacked legal standing in many ways. They didn't understand the complex legal procedures. Critically, they didn't have the money for lawyers, or even just to travel to the distant court towns. And the courts themselves were often deeply biased, siding with the powerful landowners and moneylenders who did understand the system, who could offer bribes, who could exert influence.
It sounds utterly hopeless.
It was. And even more tragically, when they tried to protest or voice their grievances outside the formal legal system, maybe through their traditional means, appealing to local authorities, holding community gatherings, they were either punished or ignored.
Punished how?
Beatings, imprisonment, further dispossession. Any collective action was swiftly and often brutally suppressed by the colonial police or sometimes even the military. Their pleas were met with total indifference.
So this absolute systemic lack of justice, this relentless silencing of their pleas, that was the final straw.
That was the single most potent catalyst for the rebellion. Absolutely. When a people are stripped of their land, their liberty, their dignity, and then systematically denied any legal, peaceful, or traditional means to voice their profound suffering, well, it creates an explosive situation. Violent uprising starts to feel like the only perceived option left, the only way to survive, to reclaim some semblance of their humanity.
It really sounds like a truly suffocating environment, doesn't it? One where their traditional ways just offered zero defense against this new, opaque, inherently predatory system. They were completely cornered, no escape.
Totally cornered, yeah.
So what did this relentless, systematic oppression ultimately mean for their very identity, their collective survival? You said it wasn't just about losing land or money, it was something far deeper.
It was. It wasn't merely about the loss of land or the deprivation of money, though those were devastating. It was a deep existential erosion of their very being. Their intricate traditional social structures, their communal way of life, their systems of self-governance, their distinct cultural identity, everything was under systematic assault.
Can you imagine a society built on trust, reciprocity, communal ownership?
Suddenly forced into this legalistic, individualistic, ruthlessly exploitative framework they couldn't comprehend, let alone navigate. Their profound spiritual and cultural connection to the land, which was utterly central to their identity, their worldview was being violently severed.
Their independence destroyed?
Their economic independence, built over centuries, utterly destroyed, replaced by dependency, by this perpetual, inescapable cycle of debt. And their inherent dignity was constantly trampled upon, reducing them in the eyes of the Dikas to just sources of labor and profit, objects, not people.
It really does raise that critical question, doesn't it? How long? How long can any people endure such a systematic dismantling of their entire existence, such a comprehensive assault on their identity, before they are just compelled to rise up?
Exactly. And the sources clearly show the Santals were pushed right to that absolute brink, to a point where the risks of open rebellion, however terrifying, however formidable the odds, seemed less daunting than the certainty of continued degradation and, frankly, slow cultural death.
Yeah.
They had, quite literally, nothing left to lose but their chains.
So with this overwhelming, inescapable injustice, something absolutely had to give. It just couldn't go on.
The pressure was immense.
And our sources tell us that in that pivotal year, 1855, two extraordinary figures emerged from the heart of the Santal community. Ordinary men who would, through their courage, their vision, become immortal legends in the annals of resistance. And here's where it gets really interesting, I think, because this wasn't a rebellion started by, kings or nobles, not the traditional ruling class. It was by two brothers, just ordinary Santal men.
That's right. And what's truly fascinating here is that remarkably organic emergence of leadership. directly from within the community itself, rather than from those traditional inherited power structures or established elites.
Yeah.
The sources are very specific about this, emphasizing its grassroots nature. The principal leaders were Sidu and Kanu, two brothers.
From where exactly?
They hailed from the humble village of Bognadi in the Santal region, and the emphasis on their status is crucial. The sources say they were not kings or nobles, just ordinary Santal men,
Why is that detail so important?
because it powerfully underscores the true strength of the uprising. It demonstrates the immense power of ordinary people, when united by shared suffering and a profound common cause, to rise up and challenge an overwhelming, seemingly invincible colonial power.
It wasn't just top-down.
Not at all. And Sidu and Kanu weren't just charismatic leaders in a political sense. They were perceived by their people as divinely inspired.
Ah, okay, how so?
Well, there are accounts, believed deeply by the Santals, that they received visions. Visions from the Thakur Bonga, the supreme being in Santal belief.
Really? What did the visions tell them?
These visions reportedly instructed them to rise up, to reclaim their land, to fight against the Dikas and their whole oppressive system. This spiritual mandate gave their leadership an undeniable moral authority, a sacred weight, and it galvanized their followers like nothing else could have.
So it wasn't just a political movement, it had a deep spiritual dimension for them.
Absolutely, which made it incredibly powerful. And along with their two younger brothers, Chand and Payav, they formed this core leadership group. They provided focus, moral guidance, and practical direction for the widespread discontent that had just been simmering for decades.
And their mission was clear.
Audacious and clear. They had the courage to unite their people. And crucially, they explicitly declared war against British oppression. This was far more than just a protest or a riot. It was a solemn, sacred declaration of total war, total resistance against the entire exploitative system that had ravaged their lives.
Wow. Declaring war on the British Empire.
From a small village, it's extraordinary courage.
The sources describe this truly monumental event, the one that marked the formal, public beginning of the rebellion. This massive gathering at Bognadi. It sounds like it wasn't just a casual meeting, was it? It sounded like a foundational, almost sacred moment. A profound collective commitment to a completely new revolutionary path.
Indeed. That gathering wasn't simply a meeting. It was a profound act of collective defiance, a clear declaration of intent, a deeply spiritual rallying point that really solidified the Santal resolve.
When did this happen?
On June 30th, 1855, Sidu and Kanu issued a call, sending out saltree branches as messengers, a traditional Santal method. And in response, a massive gathering of over 10,000 Santals converged under a towering saltree in their home village, Bognadi.
10,000 people, that's incredible.
The sheer scale of it speaks volumes, doesn't it?
Hmm.
About the widespread discontent, the depth of the anger, and the powerful unity that could be forged among the Santal people once that clear purpose and charismatic, divinely sanctioned leadership emerged.
Just imagine that scene. Thousands of people traveling from different villages.
Driven by this common purpose, this shared sense of profound injustice, converging on this single sacred spot in their homeland. The setting itself, under that venerable tree in the heart of their ancestral lands, it was simple, but incredibly powerful. Symbolic.
Grounding their defiance in the land itself.
Exactly. It imbued the gathering with this sense of ancient legitimacy, drawing on their traditions even as they forged this radical new path. And this wasn't some clandestine meeting in the shadows. It was public. A huge, almost theatrical declaration of their collective will, designed to inspire, unite, and send a very clear message to their oppressors.
And it was at this incredibly charged gathering that Sidu and Kanu made their historic defiant declaration. What exactly did they say? What was the profound significance of that moment? You mentioned the term Dikas again.
Their words weren't just a political statement. They were a direct, unequivocal challenge to the entire existing power structure, a clear articulation of their fundamental demands. Sovereignty and dignity. They declared, and I'm paraphrasing the spirit from the historical account, something like, "The rule of the company and the Dikas must end. We will no longer live under their rule. We will reclaim our land and our dignity. Thakur himself has ordered us."
Wow. Bringing the divine command right into it.
Absolutely. And that term Dikas, again, it was critical. It wasn't just generic outsiders. It specifically meant that entire class of exploitative oppressors. The Mahajans, the Zamindars, the corrupt police, the railway contractors, the British officials who sanctioned it all.
The whole oppressive system.
It encapsulated the entire system. identifying the alien rulers and exploiters who had just completely disrupted their lives. This declaration was a profound statement of their intent to completely sever ties with that colonial system, to reestablish their inherent sovereignty, Santal Raj, over their own lives and their land.
So, this gathering, sealed with oaths, this collective outpouring of resolve, this was the official start.
This officially raised the Santal Hul, the rebellion, the insurrection. This moment transformed years of simmering grievances, individual suffering, localized protests into a full-blown, organized revolt against the British and their powerful, often cruel allies, the landlords and moneylenders.
A clear, undeniable turning point.
Absolutely. Shifting the Santals from passive endurance to active, unified, revolutionary resistance. It was the moment collective consciousness finally transformed into unified collective action. It signaled that the Santals would no longer just passively accept their grim fate. The fight was on.
Okay, so once that momentous call was made at Pognadi, our sources tell us the rebellion spread like wildfire. That phrase just perfectly captures the astonishing speed and intensity of their uprising, doesn't it?
It really does. It implies spontaneity, but also this incredible energy.
Where exactly did it spread, and what did the Santals do when they rose up? It must have been an absolutely terrifying sight for the British authorities and those local collaborators, the Dikas.
Terrifying, yes. And this rapid, widespread propagation of the rebellion, it really demonstrates the deep-seated anger that had built up over generations of exploitation.
Right.
But also, surprisingly perhaps, the significant organizational power the Santals could command, even with limited traditional resources, once that clear, divinely sanctioned leadership emerged.
So where did it reach?
It quickly expanded across the entire region known then as the Santal Parganas, a vast territory spanning present-day Jharkhand, but also spilling over into parts of Bihar and West Bengal. Think Birbhum, Bhagalpur, Munger districts.
So definitely not just a small, localized skirmish.
Oh, no. This was a widespread, coordinated insurrection. It presented an immediate and significant challenge to the British East India Company's administrative control, their revenue collection, across a large, strategically important region.
And what were their primary tactics? How did they specifically target the very systems and symbols that had systematically oppressed them for so long? It sounds like their actions were both symbolic and really pragmatic.
They were indeed both. Profoundly symbolic, but also incredibly pragmatic, directly striking at the heart of their grievances, the instruments of their suffering. First, they launched direct attacks on British offices.
Police stations, administrative buildings.
Exactly. Police stations, local administrative outposts, catcheras, railway stations under construction, post offices, tangible symbols of colonial power, the places where their exploitation was formalized, enforced. By targeting these, they were directly challenging the authority that had dispossessed them, denied them justice. It was an act of reclaiming territory, reclaiming administrative control.
Makes sense. What else?
Second, and this is perhaps even more symbolically powerful, psychologically liberating for them, they systematically burned records of debt.
The loan documents.
Exactly. This wasn't just random destruction. It was a profound, almost sacred act of liberation. These physical records, the ledgers, the bonds, the promissory notes, these were the literal chains binding them to the moneylenders. The documents that legitimized their bonded labor, their perpetual debt.
So destroying them was like breaking the chain.
Literally and metaphorically, yes. A declaration of freedom from the debt traps, a violent erasure of their economic slavery, an attempt to just reset the scales of justice. It sent a visceral message. We are no longer your property.
Powerful stuff. And third,
they actively chased out and directly confronted their immediate exploiters, the Mahajans, the Zamindars. These were the figures who had abused and impoverished them daily. The Santals removed them from their villages, reclaiming their homes, reclaiming their lands on a local level, trying to restore their traditional social order by expelling those who had corrupted it.
So they were clearing out the Dikas.
Essentially, yes. They also attacked railway construction sites. These were seen not just as symbols of British encroachment, but often involved forced labor or unfair wages, displacing people. So their targets were precise, the oppressors and the instruments of oppression, not necessarily the general non-Santal population unless they were seen as active collaborators.
It's still absolutely incredible, though, isn't it, to imagine them armed, as the sources say, only with their traditional weapons?
Bows, arrows, axes, spears.
Courageously facing down the immense might of the British Empire. What was the sheer disparity in their arsenals? How did they possibly face such overwhelming odds? It just speaks to this almost unfathomable level of courage or maybe desperation.
Both, I think.
Yep.
It highlights the sheer bravery, the unwavering determination, but yes, also the desperation that fueled their fight. Despite that clear, brutal technological disadvantage, the asymmetry of arms was stark, almost unimaginable.
Bows and arrows versus...
Versus the formidable forces of the British East India Company, equipped with British guns and cavalry. We're talking precision-engineered Enfield rifles. Muskets before that, capable of rapid, accurate fire from a distance the Santal arrows couldn't hope to match reliably.
And artillery.
Artillery pieces, yes, cannons that could just decimate entire formations or villages from afar. And highly mobile cavalry units, horse-mounted soldiers that could swiftly maneuver across the terrain and circle rebel positions, deliver devastating charges.
So literally arrows against bullets.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Yet, despite this overwhelming technological gap, the Santals bravely faced these odds. It shows this unwavering determination, fueled by that profound sense of injustice, their fight for dignity, for survival. Their courage wasn't born of naivety, I don't think.
No.
No, it was born of this deep, unshakable conviction that they had, quite literally, nothing left to lose but their freedom, and that maybe death and resistance was preferable to a life of continued degradation.
Did they use the terrain to their advantage? Guerrilla tactics.
Oh, absolutely. They had intimate knowledge of the forests and hills. They used ambushes, hit-and-run tactics, tried to lure the British forces into difficult terrain where cavalry and artillery were less effective. That was crucial for any successes they had early on.
But inevitably, the British response, it must have been swift, overwhelming, and utterly brutal.
Tragically, yes, as might have been expected. The British felt gravely threatened by this uprising, and it was a significant threat. It shook their administrative control over a large, economically important region, disrupted communications, halted railway work.
So they hit back hard.
They responded with extreme, disproportionate violence. Their objective wasn't just suppression. It was to crush the rebellion utterly, decisively. To make an example, really. Serve as a terrifying deterrent to any future uprisings, anywhere in their empire.
And the consequences for the Santals.
Devastating. Simply devastating. Thousands of Santals were killed. The sources are clear on that. This underscores the brutal repression they faced. It turned a valiant act of resistance into a horrific massacre.
What kind of tactics did the British use?
Scorched earth tactics were common. Burning Santal villages to the ground, destroying their crops and grain stores to starve them out. Indiscriminately killing those merely suspected of involvement, sometimes including women and children.
Oh, God.
Martial law was declared across the affected districts. This gave soldiers sweeping powers arrest, summary execution without trial. Entire regiments of the Bengal native infantry were deployed, led by British officers, with explicit orders to suppress the whole at any cost.
Just overwhelming force.
Completely. Yet, despite this incredible brutality, the horrifying casualties, the ruthless tactics used against them, Sidu and Kanu continued the fight, refusing to surrender.
Incredible resilience.
It speaks volumes about their leadership, doesn't it? And the unyielding spirit of the Santal people, even facing certain death, overwhelming odds, they clung fiercely to their demand for freedom, for justice. Their defiance, even as defeat loomed, would echo for generations.
So the rebellion, despite its fierce beginning, that incredible courage we've talked about, it eventually met a tragic end. Our sources detail the heartbreaking betrayal and the ultimate sacrifice of its valiant leaders, Sidu and Kanu.
Yes, the end came relatively quickly, actually, considering the initial ferocity. And the manner of their defeat through betrayal, it's a poignant detail, isn't it?
It really is.
And sadly, it often marks these unequal conflicts, where a desperate, outmatched force faces a powerful, resourceful enemy. It just speaks to the immense challenges of sustaining such a movement when internal divisions or fear or maybe even incentives can be exploited by the opposing force.
When did they fall?
It was in August 1855, so just about 2 months after that momentous declaration at Bougainville. Sidu and Kanu were betrayed, caught, and killed by the British.
Betrayed. By whom?
The sources suggest they were possibly with the help of local collaborators. It's not always definitively stated who, but this adds that layer of complexity, of tragedy. It highlights the insidious ways colonial powers often operated, exploiting existing rivalries perhaps, or offering substantial rewards for information, turning community members against each other, maybe out of desperation, maybe greed.
That makes it even sadder.
It does. And the capture and subsequent death of these charismatic, divinely sanctioned leaders, well, it naturally led to the swift suppression of the remaining pockets of the uprising.
They were the heart of it.
They were the heart and the guiding force. Without Sidu and Kanu, the Santal whole lost its central command, its spiritual impetus. The British were then able to systematically dismantle the remaining resistance, hunting down, rounding up, punishing those who had participated. The main organized resistance collapsed fairly quickly after their deaths, though sporadic fighting might have continued for a bit longer.
And the human cost of this valiant yet ultimately doomed uprising. We touched on it, but it was absolutely staggering, wasn't it?
Immense, a truly grim testament to the brutality of the colonial suppression. The source explicitly states that over 15,000 Santals lost their lives in the uprising.
15,000? That's just hard to comprehend.
It's a truly staggering number. It underscores the sheer scale of the massacre, the ruthless effectiveness of the British counterinsurgency campaign. To put that into perspective, it represented a devastating loss for the Santal community at the time, an entire generation of fighting men, and tragically, many women and even children caught in the indiscriminate crossfire of colonial retribution.
It paints such a chilling picture.
It does, the price paid for their defiance. But it also underscores the profound magnitude of the injustice that drove them to such a desperate, ultimately self-sacrificing fight. And for the survivors, the aftermath was often further displacement, economic ruin, persistent famine in some areas, just devastation.
So even though the rebellion was so brutally crushed, the immediate outcome is so devastating in terms of human life, our sources really emphasize that its spirit of resistance lived on.
Yes, that's the crucial takeaway.
So what was the immediate and maybe more importantly, the long-term legacy of this epic struggle? What does it all mean, really, beyond the immediate battlefield failure?
This is precisely where the true power and enduring significance of this story lie. It's in its profound impact, far beyond the immediate outcome of military defeat. And it raises that important question for us, doesn't it? How do such acts of resistance, even when suppressed with overwhelming force, fundamentally change the course of history? How do they shape the future?
Did it have any immediate impact on the British?
Immediately, yes. Despite being brutally crushed, the Santal Hole shook the British Empire. It sent a clear, undeniable, and bloody message across India. Tribal communities would not just silently endure systematic exploitation forever. This uprising was a stark warning. It demonstrated the volatile, incredibly costly consequences of unchecked oppression.
So it made them nervous.
Deeply nervous. It compelled the British to reevaluate their treatment of tribal communities. Now, this wasn't necessarily out of sudden benevolence, but out of strategic concern.
Right, self-interest.
It indicated that the rebellion, despite its military failure, achieved a significant political consequence. It forced the colonial administration to grudgingly acknowledge that their policies weren't just morally reprehensible, they were also strategically dangerous. They could lead to further, maybe even more widespread, costly, destabilizing uprisings.
Did this lead to any actual changes, reforms?
It did. This reevaluation often led directly to the creation of special laws in specific administrative regions. The most direct outcome was the formation of the Santal Parganas district itself in late 1855, early 1856, carved out from parts of Bhagalpur and Birbhum.
Okay. And what was special about this district?
It came with specific administrative rules, later codified in things like the Santal Parganas Tenancy Act. These measures were ostensibly aimed at protecting tribal rights, for instance, prohibiting the transfer of Santal land to non-Santals, establishing simplest, more direct administrative and judicial systems, supposedly more attuned to Santal customs.
Were these reforms effective? Genuine?
Well, they were often too little, too late. And they still operated firmly within the colonial framework designed ultimately to ensure stability and revenue collection for the British.
Yeah.
But they were a direct, undeniable result of the fear and disruption the Santal Hole had caused. They wouldn't have happened otherwise.
So the rebellion, even in defeat, forced some concessions.
Absolutely. It forced the British hand to some extent.
And its legacy certainly wasn't confined just to those immediate policy changes or administrative tweaks. It continued to inspire for generations, didn't it? It became part of the cultural, historical fabric of India's anti-colonial struggle.
Oh, absolutely. The enduring legacy of Sidu and Kanu and the Santal Hole is truly profound, really widespread. They are remembered as powerful folk heroes, not just within the Santal community itself, but across various indigenous groups, Adivasi communities, and liberation movements throughout India.
Right.
Their story became this potent narrative of incredible courage, self-sacrifice, unwavering defiance against an overwhelming oppressor. And this heroism, it's concretely recognized and honored today. You see statues, schools, and memorials standing proudly in Jharkhand, Bihar, West Bengal, serving as living testaments to their sacrifice.
So they're not forgotten figures.
Far from it. These aren't just inert monuments. They're points of pride, points of remembrance, ensuring their struggle is never forgotten.
And there's a specific day of remembrance, too, isn't there?
Yes, Santal was, observed annually every 30th June, commemorating the exact day of that historic Bagnadi gathering. This annual observance ensures that the memory of the rebellion, the memory of its brave leaders, remains vibrant, alive. It actively passes on the powerful story of their struggle, their sacrifice to new generations. It's a living memorial, keeping that spirit of resistance burning brightly.
And finally, it wasn't just the Santal story, was it? It sort of transcended its specific origins to become this universal symbol of inspiration for broader freedom struggles.
Precisely. That's a key part of its legacy. The Santal transcended its immediate context. It became a powerful symbol of tribal pride and anti-colonial struggle across the wider Indian subcontinent and even beyond, really. Their extraordinary courage continues to inspire tribal movements, freedom fighters, and social justice movements across India.
That ripple effect is crucial.
It's critical to understanding its long-term impact on the very fabric of Indian history and even global histories of resistance. The Santal provided this powerful blueprint, in a way, a compelling example that even the most oppressed, the most dispossessed, can rise up in defiance, can challenge the mightiest of empires.
Even if they don't win in a military sense.
Exactly. It demonstrated that even in defeat, the sheer act of resistance itself can profoundly alter the political landscape. It can force concessions from oppressors, and crucially, it can sow these potent seeds for future, larger movements. It showed that the fundamental demand for dignity, for self-determination, for justice, it's a universal human right.
So it influenced later struggles.
Definitely. This uprising, though brutally suppressed, influenced later struggles for independence, for equity, by vividly demonstrating the immense power of organized collective action against a seemingly insurmountable foe. It's a testament to how an act of defiance, even one tragically suppressed, can resonate through centuries of history, continuously influencing, inspiring, emboldening those who come after, reminding us all, I think, that the fight for justice is often a marathon, not a sprint. And every step, every sacrifice matters. #tag outro.
We've just completed a truly remarkable deep dive, haven't we, into the Santal Rebellion, a story of just almost unimaginable courage and resilience against truly overwhelming odds.
It really is an incredible story.
We've traced the journey from the peaceful, self-sufficient lives of the Santals to that creeping, systematic injustice that dispossessed them, the defiant, divinely inspired rise of Sidu and Kanu, the brutal, asymmetric fight they waged, and ultimately that enduring, inspiring legacy of a spirit that simply refused to be broken. You've now, hopefully, gained a shortcut to being well-informed on a critical, often understated piece of global history.
And in this deep dive, I think it powerfully reveals how profoundly interconnected land, identity, and justice really are for communities, particularly indigenous ones.
Absolutely.
It reinforces the idea that knowledge is most valuable when it's deeply understood and critically applied. It reminds us that even in military defeat, acts of resistance can leave this indelible mark on history, fundamentally shaping future movements, forcing oppressive powers to reevaluate their strategies. The Santal just stands as this powerful testament to the indomitable resilience of the human spirit, facing down tyranny, and that enduring, universal quest for self-determination.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? Well, perhaps it serves as a powerful reminder of the transformative power of collective action, of the enduring human spirit in the face of unimaginable tyranny, or simply maybe the profound importance of seeking out these hidden histories, these marginalized narratives that truly shaped our world. These stories, often overlooked in the broader historical accounts, they're absolutely fundamental, aren't they, to understanding the rich, complex tapestry of human struggle and triumph.
Absolutely. And maybe consider this as you go about your day. In what ways do the echoes of the Santal resonate in modern struggles? Struggles for indigenous rights, for social justice around the world today?
That's a great question.
Even if the specific forms of exploitation have changed, they often have, becoming more subtle, perhaps, are there similar mechanisms at play?
Yeah.
Land dispossession, economic exploitation, the suppression of legal rights happening right now, maybe in different guises, that parallel the profound injustices faced by the Santals back in 1855.
The past holding keys to understanding the present?
Exactly. The past often holds those keys. It's worth thinking about.
Keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep deep diving into the stories that truly matter. We'll be back soon with another fascinating subject.